Hey guys, welcome back to the podcast. This is Rachel. Grab something yummy to drink and let's get started. So, today we're going to start with our bookish question, which is, have you ever been so distraught by the ending of a book that you just couldn't even start another book, or you had to explore more about that topic? So, Raven, you want to get us started?
Yes, I do, because the first historical fiction that I remember reading as an adult was a World War II historical fiction called The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna, which I'm sure everybody's heard of by now. But that book completely undid me at the end. This was kind of like the beginning, I would say, of me re-entering the, I don't know, reading world. I think we talked a few podcasts ago about our journey, and so this was one of the ones that really gripped me and pulled me back into the reading world. But growing up, I just didn't have a real good grasp on a lot of history. I wasn't really taught history in a very, I don't know. It wasn't really well done. I'll say it that way. And so diving back into the reading world, this was I read this book and I was just heartbroken at the end of the book. But also it sent me on just this adventure of learning more about history in that time frame. And I discovered, which I don't think that at the end of the book, it actually gives credit to the real Nightingale, even though she wasn't called the Nightingale in real life. And I don't remember what her code name was, but there is a real person that this book was based on. And I don't really know why Kristen Hanna didn't give her the credit I feel like she deserved. Um, but on that note, on that rabbit hole search, I learned that there really was someone, and obviously the story varies when you're reading historical fiction, but a lot of times when you're reading that genre, those are really based on someone's actual story. And so yeah, that was probably the first one that just undid me, and I was wrecked. Like, I was in tears. And I don't typically cry. But that one was one that really, really got to me. And I just felt like I walked around in a daze for a
Yeah.
few days. So,
Well,
did you read that book?
I did. I'm pretty sure that might be one of the first books that you recommended, because I feel like that was probably an early historical fiction book for me.
Yeah.
And but I think a lot of people can relate to the not really having a good grasp of history
Yeah.
until it becomes real, in the sense of you getting invested in people's stories.
Yeah.
So people can relate to that, not having a good grasp of history. And it's interesting because you were homeschooled and I went to public
Hmm.
school. And I think unless you're being intentional, this is a side trail, unless you're being intentional of sharing history, like you really have to do it. Not proactively is not the right word, but being intentional about sharing information that was in history with your kids, because a lot of times it's not going to naturally come up in like day-to-day life where like math does or writing does, like all those
Right.
kind of things. History, you have to be intentional. And I know a lot of people aren't fans of history, and so I think sometimes it gets kind of lost in the, well, it's not super important that we do that kind of thing, but it is, because
Hmm.
history repeats itself, sadly.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of things that I'm doing my son's junior year of school with him in this co-op, and we're reading this gigantic Patriots history book. It's like 1,000 pages, and it starts from the very beginning of America and goes all the way through. And it's interesting because there's a lot of stuff in there that, I never knew, but my kid is being exposed to it because we're being intentional about reading this book. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Talk
Yeah, it
about a
does.
rabbit hole. So,
Yeah.
anyways, But I would probably agree with you that The Nightingale is definitely a book that made me want to look more into other stories that I hadn't heard about World War II, because I think when you're learning it, it's very much like, the Nazis were bad. America had to jump in and help the other countries that couldn't defeat them. Like, you just kind of get this very watered down
Yeah.
history of it, if you get anything. So I think learning about how different countries went about the war, and how, there were fighters in those countries that were still trying to fight the Nazis in a way that they could, like all that
Right.
kind of stuff. So, anyways,
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's really good. And then I that will lead me into the next Kristen. Well, maybe I'll go into German Wife, because that's written by Kelly Reamer, so a different author. But she wrote this book, The German Wife, so kind of staying in the same time frame here for me. Um, that is one that caused me, you too, I think, to just kind of go into a deep dive of what happened after the war. That do you have like a short synopsis of that book?
yeah, it's a guy who worked for the Nazis, a scientist,
Yeah.
against his will, and or they try to make it seem like that. And then America brings a whole bunch of scientists over, which actually happened. Brings a whole bunch of them over to America after the war, and then they start working on um, more sciencey stuff, which
Yeah.
kind of led into I mean, not to get too historical or whatever about it, but Russia and America were competing for the scientists. So some of the scientists go to Russia, some of the scientists come here, and that kind of leads into the Cold War situation.
Hmm.
So the German Wife is about a family that comes over here and them trying to make a life here with all of the people that know that they were Nazis.
Yeah.
So,
So like I think it's really good to read things from different perspective. And I think this book was that for me, of just like, I know that there were probably some people, some Germans, obviously, that were like just trying to survive. Like they were not for everything that was happening. Um, and that must have been really hard. So that I like reading historical fiction and learning about these different things, because it makes me sit in another person's, like, what would I
yeah,
do?
yeah,
And you have children, and they were very against, right? Like, was he
yeah,
against it?
yeah.
Because I don't remember. I
I
know
don't,
she
yeah.
was.
Yeah. I don't think that they wanted to go along with it, but he also, didn't want to.
Yeah, and he kept it hidden from her for a while, what he was
Yeah.
actually doing, and then she discovered. Yeah. So, um but just, I don't know, like that just it makes my brain kind of, I don't know, it just makes my brain think differently, and
Well, I think it
having,
does it does a good job of like making you question like what would I do
yeah,
in that situation? And I think when you add that layer to any book, it just kind of makes it that much deeper.
yeah. And we all think like, oh no, I would never, like, those people are horrible, but like when you're in this situation, you don't really know until you're in the situation. And they couldn't, I, yeah. Anyways, you should just read the book. I don't want to give too much away.
Yeah.
But I just remember that one stirred me, and it caused me to go. I didn't go quite as deep as Rachel did on this rabbit hole. She went a little deeper on this one. But I think you had read another book before that. Didn't you read Operation Paperclip before that?
Yeah.
Or, yeah,
Yeah.
you had read
So,
it before we
yeah.
read this book.
So, which we'll talk about on another episode, but
Yeah,
yeah. So I kind of already had some like awareness of that
right.
this had actually happened, but yeah.
All right. So my next one that I have on my list, like we had to limit. I just want you guys to know that we
Yes.
had to limit the rabbit hole books that we've gone on. But um, the next one is a Kristen Hanna book, The Four Winds. That takes place during the Dust Bowl, Great Depression, like that time period. This was not, I will say, this was not one of my favorite Kristen Hanna books, for just a variety of reasons. But it did cause me to. want to do a nosedive in that time period, because I really didn't have a grasp on what all that was. And so my nosedive involved, like, I took my kids basically on a unit study of the Great Depression. And I think actually when I read this book, it lined up with our history somehow, because, in the homeschooling world, we call those like magical moments when everything aligns. And then
Yes.
you're just like, okay, we're all going to go and learn about this. So we watched a documentary about like the Dust Bowl, which was really sad.
Mm-hmm.
And just that whole, if you don't know anything about that period of American history, it's so heartbreaking. But I got a lot of books, and we just did a lot of reading and learned about the Great Depression. So Kristen Hanna's book is what kind of took me down that hole. Um, are there any other books that you like? Knows,
I
does Annie Jacobson have any? I know we're going to talk about her later, but like, does she have any other books that
that
kind of talk
correlate
about
to
that?
the yeah. No, I don't think I was able to really find um another book that went along with that.
Yeah,
I definitely think it's a time period that's not talked about a whole lot.
yeah.
There was now that I'm thinking of it, there was, I think it was maybe a biography on FDR, but it talked about, like Hoovervilles and
Yeah.
stuff, which was what it was President Hoover at the time, and it created a lot of homeless camps.
Hmm.
Um, but I think this book was super popular when it came out. Like I remember it being everywhere. Everybody was reading it. Um, so I mean, it's definitely I say that insane. I think a lot of people, even who don't normally tend to go for historical fiction, I think you might like this book because it seemed to be
Hmm.
pretty popular with a wide
I
variety of
think it's
people.
actually kind of circling back too, from what I've seen in the bookstagram world. It's
Oh,
pretty much on everybody's page.
well, that's interesting because normally we are not reading the books that are super popular on
Yeah, I don't
Instagram.
know. Well, I mean, there are elements in that book that I can see why people are reading that one again, if
Yeah,
you remember.
I don't, but I'll take your word for it.
There was a relationship in there that, I'll just say, there were
Oh,
pages skipped.
yeah. Okay.
But yeah, which was, I don't know, but I read that one, and it did take me down the rabbit hole of just learning about that, and I'm really thankful I did, cuz I had no idea.
Yeah.
So the next book that I put on my list was The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. Y'all, read that book. Rachel, did you read it? I don't know if you did. I don't remember if you did.
No.
Oh, read it. Did you watch the
I know.
movie?
No, I was saving it and then I got sidetracked. So I'll have
You
to
really
circle
need to
back
read
to
that.
it now. Yeah, I
Yes,
know.
you do. I'm telling you, I bought that book years ago because I was at a book sale with someone that was much smarter than me. And she was like, have you read this book? And I said, no. And she put it in my basket and said, you have to read this book. Well, fast forward like 10 years, I finally read it, and my mind was blown.
Yeah.
So, there is a movie. Please read the book first. Okay, please read the
But
book
the
first.
movie isn't called. Is the movie called
The
the
movie is called The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks.
Oh, okay.
Um, yeah, it is. It will blow your mind to no end. If you will indulge me, I
Well,
will read a little
yeah, I
blurb
was going to
about it.
say like tell us what it's about.
Okay, it's by Rebecca Sklootz. And this is not a historical fiction. I think everything else I mentioned was historical fiction. This one is not. Okay. Her name was Henrietta Lacks, but scientists know her as Gila. She was a poor Southern tobacco farmer who worked the same land as her slave ancestors, yet her cells, taken without her knowledge, guys, mind blowing, became one of the most important tools in medicine. The first immortal human cells grown in culture, which are still alive today. I lost my spot. Okay. Though she has been dead for more than 60 years. So just like think about that for a second. HeLa cells were vital for developing polio vaccine, uncovered secrets of cancer, viruses, and the atom bomb's effects. It helped lead to important advances like vitro fertilization, cloning, and gene mapping, and have been bought and sold by billions. Okay. That's all I have to say. Y'all need to go get this book and read it. It is crazy. And just her story of how they, I don't know. It's very
Yeah.
sad. Um, and just what they, I don't know, just like her cells are still alive today. It's so crazy to me.
Isn't that like isn't part of or is I don't know if it's that or part of the movie, but like her family was challenging the rights that they had
Yeah.
to the stuff. Is that in
Yeah.
the
I
book
don't,
too? Yeah.
they do talk about that, but a lot of that has to do because this book was written. I think Rebecca Sklootz helped them, or she had a part to play in that,
Like
of
helping the
help.
family. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I don't
Interesting.
know how that ended though. I don't remember if it was still an ongoing
Well, it sounds
situation.
like you're not done with your rabbit hole.
Okay, but yes, but here's the thing. Like they took those cells without her knowledge. N- Never one gave her an opportunity to consent to that, first of all. And then second of all, like they were poor. They were suffering and there were people that were making money off of, I don't know, like that was just very
Yeah.
invasive, I feel like, and I don't feel like, I know. And they were, her and her husband were struggling just to feed their family.
Yeah.
And oh, oh, it just boils my blood. So
Yeah.
I get fired up about that one because it's just so sad.
Yeah. Well, I'll
Um,
have to add it to my things. Okay, so I think that kind of deep story dive kind of segues into Annie Jacobson, which I know I said I was going to talk about later, but I'm just going to go ahead and talk about now. She is a writer, an author who does, I don't even know what you would call it. I mean, it's nonfiction, but it's always these deep investigative journalist style books. I have only read two. She has several. So I have read the one that we already talked about, which is Operation Paperclip, the secret intelligence program that brought Nazi scientists to America. And then I also read First Platoon, which is a story of modern war in the age of identity dominance. So Operation Paperclip was the one, obviously, that talked about what kind of happened with all the scientists. Because I mean, everybody kind of knows, like during World War II, in the Nazi camps, concentration camps and stuff, they were doing experiments, horrible experiments,
yeah,
um, on these people and learning. But it sadly helped propel science a great bit because we have regulations now to not have human testing. Um, but I guess when you don't have limits, the sky's the limit. So
right.
they learned a lot of things about um, scientific stuff by testing it on these people. And so she talks a little bit about that, but then it was the race of even when we were like liberating towns as we were going in um, to Germany on our way from France and all the other places. They would scoop up these scientists and try to beat the Russians to get the scientists. So, like I said, some of the scientists went to Russia, some of them came here. Um, and then she goes into like how their life was while they were here and the advancements that they made for the American people. I think this book really challenged me in the aspect of, I think as Americans, we like to think that our country is always in the right,
Right.
and that we've never, like, we're always going to choose the higher moral ground and that kind of stuff. And not, I mean, my husband was in the military, like, I'm totally pro America.
Right.
But
Yeah.
I think we have to acknowledge, too, as a country, that we are not squeaky clean. And for us to try to act like we are and judge other countries is highly inconsistent with what we have chosen to do in our
Yeah.
past history. So I think, again, just being aware of actual facts of history versus like the whitewash coding that we get in, say, school. But
Mm-hmm.
that one was super interesting. And then the first Platoon one is about how during like the Iraq-Afghan war, they were using like facial recognition stuff to find these terrorists and whatever. But she kind of goes into like, where's the limit with this? Like, people weren't giving consent, and they were using their biometrics. So they were taking their blood when they would get a terrorist in custody. They would take their blood and fingerprints and facial scans and all of this stuff that they weren't consenting to. But it's
Mm-hmm.
kind of under the guise of like, well, we're doing it as a country to keep us safe, kind of thing. So she really takes topics and makes you question kind of what you thought about it, even if
Yeah.
you just only had kind of like a vague knowledge of it, and really questions the narrative that if you have heard of something that you were told. So she has like one on the U.S. government's investigation into like aliens, and then the Pentagon and CIA, Area 51. So basically any kind of conspiracy theory
Yeah.
that's floating around out there, she she does it well, I think. And I think she tells it in a way of investigative journalism where it's like, here's the facts, and she
Yeah.
doesn't tell you what to think, which I appreciate. But it's very interesting. It is nonfiction, though. I do think she does a good job most of the time to like kind of keep it in a story format.
Yeah.
Like with the ones from the Iraq guys, she ends up, I don't know if it was Iraq or Afghanistan, but like that conflict. She follows, if I'm remembering correctly, follows a unit of guys that dealt with this kind of stuff. So there is slight story, there's slight characters, but it really is a nonfiction. So, there's that. It doesn't read like a textbook, but it is, I don't know. Nonfiction
Yeah.
is not my favorite. So I have
I
to be
was gonna
very
say.
into I have to be very into the topic for me to actually stick it out and make it.
Yeah. And if you ever have the opportunity to go on an adventure with someone who's read or is reading Annie Jacobson, it's a lot of fun. I've never read any of her books, but I've been on lots or I guess 2 adventures with Rachel.
Because it's the same thing like you were saying with the Henrietta thing. It's like, how do you not know
Right.
that this happened? Like,
Yeah.
how do we not know as a society that this went down? Which I think is, one of the reasons why we wanted to do this podcast, because there are so many books that will lead you on to further exploring other things, which is one of the fantastic things about reading books.
Yeah. Yeah. And how
Yeah.
did they keep these things from
Yeah.
us? Like
Right.
that's
Well,
the whole.
and going back to several episodes ago with talking about the quality of books, you know what I mean? Like,
Mhm.
you can read books for fun and fantasy and stuff like that, but it is fun also to read about something that you don't know existed and now you do, you
Right.
know? So,
Yeah, I agree. Okay, guys, that brings us to the end of part 1. This is actually going to be a 2-parter just because we didn't want this one to go super long. We can talk on this subject for a very long time. So we decided to split it up into 2 parts. Part 2 will be up and live next week. We hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and we will catch you on the next podcast. I don't know.
bye.
Bye.